if you like Spectator TV, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Spectator TV is picking up thousands of new subscribers every week, and you should be one of them. Just click the subscribe button at the bottom of this video and tap the bell icon so you never miss an episode. First up, Douglas Moyer writes about George Osborne's plan to return the Elgin Marbles to Greece in this week's magazine. Why is it that more and more museum directors seem to hate the collections they're looking after? Douglas joins me now. Douglas, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV. You write in the magazine this week about a particular affliction that seems to affect Tories in middle age and how you always suspected George Osborne was going to succumb to it. So can you tell us a bit about that, please, and why you think George Osborne was a prime candidate for a midlife crisis?
Yes, it's a fascinating part of political anthropology that there is a type of conservative, particularly conservative male, it has to be said, who in middle age has a sort of breakdown about their beliefs and, see also Matt Hancock, and usually this expresses itself in a loss of belief in the things that they have argued for hitherto, and usually the adoption of a right-on cause as they see it. Ordinarily, it manifests in requests for the legalization of marijuana or drugs of some kind. And that's the most common one. Crispin Blunt, perhaps, is a good example as well. I think the explanation is that a certain type of conservative has been so used to espousing relatively unpopular or uncool opinions that they hope that if they do something sort of grand in middle age, it'll make up for it and wash all of these sins away. I say that George Osborne has long been a prime candidate for this. George Osborne, of course, gets all of the attacks and brickbats of the left, I think rather unfairly. I mean, they literally accuse him of being a murderer. Of killing people through austerity, which of course was not really austerity at all. But anyway, he suffered a lot of unpopularity, perhaps culminating in that famous boo in the stadium in the London Olympics, which must have been very upsetting to him. But I predicted that he would be the sort of conservative who would end up having a midlife crisis, and he would have to espouse some right-on cause. And the moment that he took over as chairman of the trustees of the British Museum, I thought, I see this one coming.
He's arranged, so this is manifested, he's arranged a loan for the Elgin Marbles. Can you tell us a bit about that? Why is it such a bad deal, for example, to give the Greeks the Elgin Marbles for a little while?
Well, I mean, first of all, as I say, it's a totally predictable thing. If you become chair of the trustees of the British Museum and you're conservative, you will feel a disproportionate desire to send the Elgin Marble to Greece. It's so tempting as this wonderful demonstration of right honoring. And of course, George Osborne, we've learned, has been negotiating this return. I say that in the magazine, I think it's a rather unwise deal, a deal that's so cat-handed, in fact, so far as we know, that it could have been negotiated by an Austin Powers villain. It's apparently a deal that the British Museum sends the marbles to Athens, and in return, Athens sends some treasures that have never before been seen in the UK. That's very nice of them, I'm sure, but I would have thought that the likelihood of the marbles being returned is exceptionally small, as Noel Malcolm of All Souls, among others, has said this week. It would only require one Greek citizen to go to court and insist that marbles must not be returned to the UK, and that would hold it up on its own, and goodness knows that person might even find the Greek courts are slightly sympathetic to their case. So it isn't a very wise a deal, it seems to me. And although people deny it, there's just no doubt that when it comes to this alleged returning of treasures, you start off with one and you go straight on to the others. The Benin Bronzes have long been, or at least for some years, have been regarded as sort of stolen loot, which most of them are not. And the Obar of Benin has been getting more press recently than at any time since the late 19th century. And the Benin Bronzes will, of course, be next. And then you just go down the list. There's calls from Egypt for the Rosetta Stone to be sent there. It just won't end. And as I say, it's a demonstration of a type of weakness, but a type of weakness that really only the Tory male in midlife is capable of.
And you mentioned in the piece as well, Douglas, that all this seems to be going on, this sort of obsession with giving the marbles back and decolonising the museum comes at a time when the British Museum is facing a bit of a crisis in terms of the theft of missing items. Do you think they've been distracted, essentially, from their main functions?
Yes, that's right. Almost 2,000 artefacts appear to have been stolen from the British Museum under the noses of the director and trustees. It's extraordinary. A member of staff has been fired, and the museum's director has resigned. But we've subsequently learned that even 2 years ago, a Danish expert wrote to the British Museum saying that artifacts from the British Museum were finding their way onto the market, even being put on eBay. And so, having been alerted to this 2 years ago, the British Museum appears not to have acted at all and thought that actually everything was fine. I wonder if this isn't the time to extend one of my own laws. I might histrionically call it Murray's Law, which is this: in the same way that we now know that when an energy company goes on about how green they are, we know that they're polluters. And in the same way that we now know that when a bank goes sort of huge on BLM or something, they're actually corrupt, or that when a financial services firm decides to go huge on ESG, DEI, and all the other stuff, it's because they're not giving good returns to their customers. We should, I think, start to assume that when museums like the British Museum end up obsessing over their collection as if they're stolen goods, actually they are not in charge of the collection in the way they should be. Actually, they are not protecting and preserving the collection, which is, after all, their sole job. I think we should expect, in such cases, the moment that a museum director or curator starts talking about getting rid of the collection as if it's a set of hot stolen goods off the back of a truck, we should assume that they actually do not have the ability to do the basics of looking after the core of the collection.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned the museum director there who's recently resigned. I mean, he was behind moving the bust of Hans Sloane from a different part of the museum because of his links to the slave trade. I mean, do you ever get the sense of why do these people in particular take these jobs if they resent their collections so much?
You're so right. I mean, exactly. The director who did that, of course, totally tokenistic and pointless and actually rather insulting gestures like the movement of the bust become a sort of cover, as I say, for sort of inadequacies at best elsewhere. I think you can see this in collection after collection. I've written about this in the magazine before. Most obvious example is the Wellcome Trust. But I would suggest that people should do a serious audit on the governance of Tate Britain, among others. I've written about this in the magazine before, but Tate Britain is run by people who seem to hate the collection in their care and keep insulting the artists whose work they are meant to be preserving for future generations. Most notably, Tate Britain has closed the Rex Whistler mural room, insulted Rex Whistler, who died fighting the Nazis, also insulted Stanley Spencer and degraded him as some kind of racist. I think that all of the people in charge of the collection of Tate Britain should be fired. I think they have no right to be in charge of a great national collection. But that's the difference that seems to exist today. There was a period where to be on a board like that of Tate Britain was to know that you had a guardianship for a short time of one of the great collections in the country and indeed in the world. It takes a certain type of extraordinary, what would you call it? Not just hubris, but a kind of arrogance to dare to think that your job is not to preserve the collection, but to stand in judgment over it, and to stand in judgment over how it was put together, and who contributed to it, and who the artists are, and whether or not they live up to your glorious self. To hell with these people. They have no right to be in charge of our great collections. Many of them are clearly, demonstrably unfit for the task. And I, at any rate, would like to see them replaced by people who actually venerate the collections and regard it as being an honour, as it is, to be in charge of such treasures.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Douglas.